As we continue to explore on open file subject, the next game will be classic. The game is between Viktor Korchnoi and David Bronstein, played in 1959 at the Soviet Union Championship. Let's see this game. I think it is rather useful. It is very educational, understanding the pawn structure also of Queen's Gambit Carlsbad. So d4, d5, c4, e6, knight c3, knight f6, bishop g5, knight bd7, e3, c6. And here Korchnoi decides to get into Carlsbad type pawn structure, Queen's Gambit Orthodox. Carlsbad, he takes cd5, ed5. So these pawn structures in a theory books is known as a Carlsbad pawn structures. And let's see how does the fight develop. Bishop d3, bishop e7, queen c2. David Bronstein plays now the idea which is also played a lot in a modern chess, but in a modern chess it is played a little bit different. He plays here move knight b6. In a modern games, if black is to follow on the same idea which Bronstein did in this game, then black plays immediately move knight to h5, which does bring some sort of advantages, because you would like to play this move knight h5 anyway, if you choose for this, because the other way is simply to play castle and to play the most standard Queen's Gambit exchange variation. But in these Carlsbad structures, if you want to play move knight h5, which Bronstein played in this game, it is more accurate to do it immediately. Because the point is that you don't need to be worried about bishop e7, queen e7, g4. If this is the reason why you want this knight away, so that bishop can control a pawn, the bishop can control this pawn. Why? Because, let me remove this, so that you don't need to control this pawn with the bishop, because you can always move knight f4. So, Bronstein in this game, however, plays first move knight b6, and only after knight f3 he plays move knight h5. Maybe he wanted white to commit his knight to f3, because in such a kind of lines, white sometimes develop castles and develops his knight to f3, and sometimes white also simply plays move knight e2, and then later castles queenside. And this is perhaps something which Bronstein wanted to avoid in this particular game. White can here also still decide to castle kingside if he wants to. So I guess that's why he played move knight b6, which is also fully playable. Knight f3, knight h5, bishop e7, queen e7. Here Korchnoi played move h3. I guess he did not want to allow this trade. For example, if he castles, I guess he did not want to allow this. In general, in this position, black does not mind to trade his bishop. Ideally, he would like to trade it for opponent's bishop, but trading it for knight often also can make sense. Another plan for black is to play here move g6, and he would like to play move knight g7 and bishop f5, and ultimately trade those two bishops. This is sort of a standard plan for black in this kind of position. Korchnoi here plays move h3, and it does allow black to use the fact that this king is still on e1, and that there is a pin. So black plays move knight f4. In general, white is not happy to allow this sort of jump, but here Korchnoi does it. Why? He goes back with the bishop to f1, and he judges that this knight will need to move anyway. Of course, Bronstein could have still stuck to his old plan and played move g6 with the idea to play move knight g7. It is maybe good to know here that, let's suppose white castles, and I move my knight. Let's say that very often in these positions, when you push g4, and you do push g4, black's counterplay will later come. Black will, let's say, play move bishop d7, You will play king b1, he will castle, let's say rook c1, he would like to play on this part of the board, because white's ideal plan is, let's say, to play move, let's suppose that you move the king. I would like to do this, knight a4, takes, takes. This move is often inconvenient because of move like queen a3, but here I see that it could be possible because there is this tempo. White's ideal plan is to play move rook to activate his rooks and to play for an attack. What is black's counterplay? Well, in this particular case, actually move c5 is probably maybe even working, because indeed of queen a3 you have move queen f6. And then let's say knight, if knight jumps, you can hit his bishop. It is kind of a very messy position. I can go away. You cannot take because I would have rook f1 and f7 is hanging, but you can move queen and then play f6 yourself. But what I wanted to say is that with this pawn on g4, in such a kind of position, one of the main counterplay plans of black is to push move h5. Because then you need to do somehow something with this pawn. And I always then have possibility to trade rooks, which is not so bad, because if I trade those rooks, then you cannot attack me on the king side. White normally then jumps, let's say can take happen, and then I will need to kick this knight out, which I have my ways to do. Well, one idea is to play, let's say, move g5, and then I would like at some moment to trade and to push f6. The second plan is just to move my bishop, and then I can play move knight e7. And by the way, I could have also started with move bishop e6 in the first place. All of those are kind of standard plans in these positions. Bronstein plays move knight f4, and this is going to bring this struggle independent character. Bishop f1, knight g6. It was also possible to castle. White would need to castle queenside, and let's say knight e6. And it will be very sharp fight. Both sides will be pushing on the sides where they are stronger. White would play on a king side, black would play on a queen side. It will be very sharp position. Move knight g6 is also possible. Bronstein played move knight g6 at once. h4. With idea on bishop g4 to play move h5, I guess. Bishop e6. On h5, Bronstein wanted, I think, to play move knight f8 and to transfer this knight to d7, and then he will play on a queen side, often by the means of jumping with the knight and start pushing his pawns. Bishop e6, bishop d3, and black here played move bishop g4, trying to use the fact that bishop is on d3 square. Why? Because now he can jump with his knight to f4. So h5, knight f4. White also could have ignored here. He could have, let's say, castle kingside. Such transactions are very unclear. Bishop f3, gf3, knight h4, grabbing a pawn. Let's say f4. I think that there is a decent compensation, because I sacrificed the pawn, but I did open files. And these files are going to help me to generate a lot of play. So I think that white is having here a full compensation for his sacrificed pawn. And I actually have very good chances to get this pawn back. Actually, in the game will happen something sort of similar. Korchnoi was not in the mood to do this. He pushed h5, knight f4, knight e5. Now we get this trade. Knight e3, queen d3, bishop e6. What black will do, he will, of course, kick this knight out. So this knight will not stay here forever. It is important for black that his pawn is still on h7. For example, if the same position would be with black's pawn on h6, well, then of course this knight would be a monster, because you can never conveniently hit it, because he can jump to g6, and then you will need to use different methods to deal with this knight, like move knight d7, trying to trade it. So bishop e6, knight e2, f6, kicking the knight, knight back to f3. And here black is using a standard plan in this position. Normally this knight does not stay on b6 forever. So black plays move knight to c4. If you are wondering whether such a move is possible to trade queens, yeah, it is possible. Queen trade is definitely a possibility in this position, but Bronstein did not want to do this. It is not kind of if it is right and wrong, it is just that he wanted to do something different. And I kind of understand him, because he wants to somehow keep more of dynamic possibilities. He doesn't want to, let's say, land in some positions where queens will be off, and then white will jump with his knight to f4, push g4, and maybe just play on a king side, while black will find difficulty to find a counterplay. So he prefers to keep his queens. Knight c4, knight f4, knight d6. Knight is usually well placed on d6 in such a kind of positions. And also he wants to maybe to be ready to push his bishop to f5. What was another possibility? Another possibility, and I think not a bad one, he could have, let's say, castle queen side and play move king b8 next move. It is a very sharp position, where I think the chances are balanced. Knight e6. Now Korchnoi does not want to give Bronstein possibility to castle queen side any longer, and he plays move queen a3. a5. Knight h4. Bishop to f7. Not sure if this is really the best move, because it will give now Korchnoi possibility for a rather interesting pawn sacrifice later on in the game. Castles looks maybe at first sight rather risky, but it is not so easy for white to really do something to this king. White has plenty of threats, but black will also get his play. Black will soon start pushing his pawns. So this was an option. White has all these kind of fancy jumps, but will not be so simple to mate. Bishop f7, g4, taking space, queen d7, castles. And now it was again decision what to do. Bronstein played move h6, trying to secure the king side. But this move has a drawback that it gives some squares. Maybe castling and saying, well, I'm not afraid of your attack, I'm not afraid of ghosts, and then simply starting rook c8 and pawn push and attack of his own was making a lot of sense for black in this kind of position. Black somehow, I think, wants to keep his options open, and that's why he played here move h6. And now Korchnoi will do a pawn sacrifice in order to use the open file, or actually, well, semi-open file, let's put it this way. He jumped, because here how to make a progress. Not easy to make a progress for white, because you cannot, you can jump to utilize this square, but after I take, probably to take by knight, because if you take by pawn, how to make a progress further? So take by knight, let's say rook g8. Yes, black has lost possibility to castle, but is it really crucial? Because it is not easy to come to this king, and black can still play either move king to f7, and then he will connect his rooks. This is, for example, one possibility. Second possibility is that he can still maybe jump with the knight to c4 and castle queen side. but king f7, I think a possibility of king f7 is making a sense. So Korchnoi decided here for pawn sacrifice. He played move knight f5. And after knight f5, g f5, queen f5, we see some of the disadvantages that that h6 move has been played. Rook dg1. White sacrificed the pawn, but he's now having everlasting pressure on g7, utilizing the g file and doubling on this g file. And this knight is at this moment extremely well placed. This bishop is containing the knight jumps, but on the other hand is relatively passive. So rook dg1. Here comes important moment, and very difficult in a practical game to take a decision. Bronstein plays a rather logical move, which I think 90% of people will play. He plays move rook g8. He defends this pawn. What he had at his possibility was to understand actually that queen on f5 is a good attacking piece. Queen on f5 on this diagonal is cutting the white king. And should the c file become open, white could be in trouble. So interesting option for black was to push move c5. What does he want? Well, it's very clear what he wants. If you, let's say, it would take on a g7, he simply wants to take. And to play move rook c8, and to try to mate this king. After c5, we can come to some interesting solutions. For example, queen a4 is one interesting line. King e7, rook g7, c takes d4. Knight g6, king e6, knight f4, and a draw by perpetual check. If black wants to be ambitious, white, because now rook c8 is a terrible threat, this rook will come here and this king is a problem. So what to do? You cannot take on f7, because if you take on f7 in this check will have a devastating consequences, because queen will enter with the next check wherever the king will go. But here move b4 is a good move. Why? Because you would like to hide your king to a1. And let's say check, king a1, queen e3, check. Now let's say rook c7 is the forced draw, rook f7 and draw by perpetual check. But also move like, let's say, king e8 is possible, queen b5, rook c6. Now again, rook takes f7 is the strongest move. For example, knight to h8 looks equally good, but now the problem is that black does not need to force draw. Why black does not need to force draw here? What is stronger for black? Bishop e6 and black mates. Now you cannot protect mate because queen cannot move to protect because pawn is hanging. Mate in 1 is a threat. And rook obviously cannot protect this mate in 1 because rook is unfortunately obliged to protect the back rank. But move rook f7 kills the attacking bishop. This rook is not an attacker. And now, well, black does not have anything better than to make a draw by perpetual check. But in this position, move c5 is for a human player a very difficult move, because you have king which is in the middle of the board, your pawn is hanging, and your pawn chain is protecting this king from potential checks. And normally speaking, you delay the decision to push the pawn. But in this particular case, pushing c5 was creating immediate counterplay versus the white king. For example, dc5 is possible. Now, for example, castles. Rook h4. Maybe this is something which Bronstein did not like. Quite possible. But after actually king h7, rook g4, rook g8. Nothing is happening. And I do have a counterplay. I would like to play, let's say, move rook d8, and I would like to push. If position opens, this king is again a problem. So probably, let's say, queen d3, knight e3, rook a8. I think that this position can be evaluated as approximately equal, because on one hand this pawn is very good on h5, controlling, fixing a black's kingside pawn structure. On the other hand, this pawn is also a liability, because it needs to keep being defended. Probably objective assessment of this position is about equal. Bronstein played move rook g8. And now rook g3. White is now doubling. Bronstein understood his idea with c5, but just he is a little bit late with this. He played here c5. D takes c5. Something which was also interesting in the game, here move king d2 is making sense. And after, let's say, move c takes d4, maybe move rook c1. It is a little bit unusual type of play, but it is possible. For example, such a type of play is not possible here, because I need my rook on a g file. But in such a position, it is possible. King d2, c d4, rook c1. Because this king is a bit of a problem, and, well, white has very active position. It is not easy for black to react here. Korchnoi took d takes c5. Castle queenside. Now, what is the most logical move? The most logical move is queen takes a5. But if queen takes a5, then actually black creates counterplay by pushing d4. Bronstein in general sensed very well that his queen on f5 is cutting the king, and the need to open up a center and to create counterplay. Only somehow the move order doing this could have been more precise, because here most likely the best for white is actually to agree to give a check. Actually, it is not even perpetual. King can move. It is possible to play for a win, because if I take, or maybe I should not play for win. No, I don't think that I can play for win, because taking on g7 is actually quite unpleasant. So I think that black has to agree to a draw in this kind of position. What can white do better here? Korchnoi here, I would give you a hint. Korchnoi played a very strong move. If you can eliminate d4 push, then this king is reasonably safe, cannot be attacked so easily. So what can he do to eliminate this d4 push? Think of this few seconds. What can I do? He pushed c6, sacrificing a pawn in order to take on a5. Now we have equal number of pawns, but c5 counterplay is not working. Sorry, d4 counterplay is not working because queen is pinned. My rook is active, hitting on this pawn on g7, and white king is actually safer. On move like c6, probably move like queen e4 was a better move, hitting on this rook, a tempo move. But white is better. We can have an entertaining variation. For example, f3, queen e5. Now black has provoked move f3, so pawn on e3 is hanging with a check. Nevertheless, white can take on a5, because this king is a weakness. Check, king b1, queen f4. If I am to suffer, I better eat a piece. C takes b7. Now problem is that a move like king b7 is impossible because of the most standard mating idea in such a positions, and this is a rook lift. Rook g4 and, well, queen check, king moves. And now again, unfortunately for black, queen is pinned, so he cannot push d4 in order to contain this rook transfer. So rook will get transferred to b4 with devastating consequences. So check, king d7. Rook g4. Rook g4 is needed because, for example, move like rook e1 does not lead to more than a draw. So rook g4 is very strong move. Queen c7. Queen check. Queen c6. For example, if king e7, there is a mating attack, rook c1. Queen takes b7. Now the pride of my position is gone, this pawn on b7, but now the rooks are dominating and king is in the open. Now the power of open files, the power of rooks. Queen d7, and now comes elegant move, not letting king escape. Queen a3. Now we see actually open files, the rooks in a full power. King e8, rook e1, bishop e6, queen a6, king f8. You cannot go king f7. You cannot go king f7 because it will cost the queen. So king moves, rook e6, and white should obviously win this kind of position because we have equal material and attack is continuing, rook b7 being a terrible threat. So queen a4, queen c6, queen a7. And now the problem is that pawn is a power. You cannot play move queen c7 because obviously of move like rook c1. So rook b8 is necessary. And now comes a killer blow. What is here a killer blow? How to improve position? I give you a hint. Two rooks are defending each other. Open file. Rook on the open file. The product of Korchnoi's pawn sacrifice, actually semi-open file. But if rook is working on this, who cares if it's semi-open or open? Rook takes g7. Rook takes g7 only move because I threaten rook f7 check. And also rook g8. I have double threat, so rook g7 only move, queen takes. Rook g2. Almost a mate on c2. Well, not quite. King a1, queen c2, rook b1. All the threats are contained, and white is now going to win the game by promotion, pawn promotion, because bishop, you cannot play move bishop g6, so you first need to eliminate pawn and queen a7. And just black is not in time with his threats, because there is going to be queen with a check. So c6, already black is in a big trouble here, because somehow timing of his move c5 was not the way he wanted, the way it was supposed to be, though Bronstein understood position very well. bc6, queen a5. White is clearly better here, but came though unbelievable blunder. Bronstein, and it was Soviet championship, so regular time limit. Bronstein here pushed d4, forgetting that his queen is hanging. And obviously after queen a5 he resigned. What I like about this game is this general fight about the timing of a pawn push in such a position, unsecurity of both kings, potential unsecurity and how to use it. And I like very much in this position this Korchnoi's idea to play g4, queen d7, castles, because at the moment you cannot take it because I will attack the queen with my rook and grab this pawn back. And after h6, I like here very much the idea to sacrifice this pawn, g-pawn, in order to open this file for a rook, in order to create a pressure and keep them pressure on the both sides. And I think this is a rather, let's say, useful idea, instructive idea of a sacrifice. So this particular position, if you have it in your own game, this sacrifice is rather instructive, because in this position you have open file, your knight is dominating this bishop in a way. Bishop is, I mean, containing the knight jumps, but bishop is passive, knight is very active. And this actually pawn is also here an asset because it is fixing a weakness on g7. So I like this strategic idea of Korchnoi. And it is interesting here that black could have reacted with a c5 and keep the equality. So I hope this second example in this chapter was useful.